Hi, I'm Paul Thomson from Spitfire Audio, and I'm going to show you in my studio today some of the things that I use to write music with and also creating stuff for Spitfire. Okay, let's start at the desk. I'll show you what I use to kind of control everything. So the centerpiece you can see here are these three SSL units. This one is really great because it's got MIDI control as well as audio control. So I can switch between Pro Tools, between Logic, and then also use it to control MIDI CCs. It's really configurable and you can color code things and all that kind of stuff. So that's incredibly useful. I've got a little Stream Deck here. This is configured so that when I open an app, it will give me app specific stuff on there. And I've actually started using a new program called Soundflow for configuring this, which means that I can do all kinds of stuff beyond just kind of key presses or things like that. You can program macros, so it can do things like bouncing out tracks and then doing a certain thing afterwards. Incredibly powerful. I've only really scratched the surface, but that's really useful. So I'm looking forward to getting more into that. I use the Grace Designs monitor control, and I've also got the output of that feeding into a system that is programmed with the room. So it kind of interprets what the speaker should sound like in this room and then time corrects and all that kind of stuff. That's really useful. The speakers are probably a little bit large for the room, but I like having larger speakers and running them quieter because I feel like I get a better kind of representation across the spectrum. You know, I've had these for so long now that I know what they sound like, and especially what they sound like in this room. So that's really good. Controller wise, I've got two other controllers here. I've got this lovely Choice Source Designs fader box, which I use as well. This is really great for going on the road, and if I'm traveling and I need to be able to program, it's really solid. And finally, this is a relatively new addition, and this is of course the Ableton Push. I used to write on an MPC 60 when I first started writing music, including writing orchestral music, believe it or not. So I'm kind of familiar with that, and I do quite like that for certain things. So that's a really useful addition as well. Okay, let's talk about hardware and outboard. So there are some things that are definitely luxuries, some things that are essential. What's essential? A computer. This is a Mac Studio. It's the M3. It's fully loaded, so it's got 512 memory, and also I think it's got an 8 terabyte hard drive. So I've got all of the sample libraries that I use installed on the computer's hard drive, as well as all of my Logic files and Pro Tools files and stuff like that. And it has an enormous voice count. So that's absolutely brilliant. And then over here, my Patchbay, often kind of neglected, a really, really useful creative tool. If you have something like this and it's well set up, it really magnifies the amount of creative options that you have. So I can patch in and out things, you know, other pieces of hardware, effects pedals, synths, outboard for, you know, the master chain, all of that kind of stuff can be controlled really easily from here. So setting one of these up is definitely a good investment, and it also setting it up well, maybe getting some advice like I did, because there's lots of different ways that you can have patches normaled through or not. You know, it's all about the workflow. So that's really useful. I've got a couple of other preamps up here. So we've got the UTA, the undertone audio, and this is one of those kind of things where there's quite a complex signal flow, and you just kind of keep switching things until it sounds good. This sounds incredible on the piano that I used to have in my old studio. I recorded the piano for the Originals Media Toolkit with this preamp, and when you kind of really boost the gain on it, you get an amazing sound. It really makes a huge difference to get a decent signal coming through, fairly hot signal, and it really comes to life. So I found that very, very useful. And in here, I'm using it on, you know, woodwind and stuff like that. I've got this great EMI TG and also this lovely Shelford channel. I tend to use those more sending stuff out of Logic and back in, or Pro Tools. In the middle here, I've got things that I sometimes put on my master chain. So I've got a fantastic SSL compressor. It's like the G-Series bus compressor, and this lovely API EQ. And I just tend to set that, it's just a smiley face. So 2 dB at the low end, with a shelf, and then 2 dB at the high end. It's very, very straightforward, nothing really complex. The Overstayer MAS is a really nice kind of, as I say, tubey sounding, but it's like a harmonic distortion thing. And you can change the different harmonics that you're getting from that. So that's really useful for cooking stuff up. The saturator does what it says, and the distressors, again, these are just kind of crunch boxes and really great for sending things out of Logic and back in again to get a bit of extra kind of life on things. So it doesn't all sound like it's too kind of in the box. That can be a bit of a risk that things end up sounding a bit sterile. Let's move over to the stack here. So at the top, we've got a bass synth, the SE1X. It's got some sentimental value because I used it on a bunch of stuff back in the 2000s. It's really fantastic, fat sound. I bought this when Roundhouse Studios shut down. I'd used it a lot in their studio downstairs, and it's a really great, it's got a lot of character. Use this a lot. And then I've got another lunchbox here, which has got my EQs and compressors in. I've got a few things that are kind of vintage. So a couple of API things here. They're great. They are clean. They don't sound too carbonized and crispy when you're trying to send signals through them. I'm more looking for character when I'm using those. I've got a couple of fantastic compressors here, which have got some real character stuff from the Rupert Neve designs. And then a couple of compressors here that are more kind of tubey. So this Shadow Hills Optograph has a really great sound. It's an optical style compressor, and the Retro, these are kind of similar, a little bit more like Yuri's, but this one's a valve one and it's got a really great sound. And then this one is probably the most similar to this, I guess. So I tend not to use that as much, because I always default to this one instead. And I've got an M7, which I used a lot for a period of time, and now not very often, but tend to be using the S Studios reverb. Okay, so the final thing that I use to kind of color sound, send things out from Logic to and back in again, is this stuff. I've got some great effects here that are all in the Patchbay. The Strymon effects are really great. This Eventide H9 has got some incredible stuff on it. That's really, really good. And the Moogs are kind of workhorse. And then less frequently, I will stick something through here. I've put everything through these. The AC30 has had 6 French horns going through it, which sounded cool. And then I've got basically a kind of bog standard Marshall speaker here. And then the heads that I've got are, the Laney is like the kind of very modern sound, kind of clean, punchy sound. The Marshall is that kind of dirty, you know, JCM 2000 sound, which is very characteristic, kind of more if you're distorting stuff rather than the clean stuff. And then the Wallace is a vintage thing that was made in London. You can see it's so old that it has an 01 prefix for London. Which makes it at least a generation older than me. So very old indeed. It's actually a bass amp. It's great for bass sounds, bass synths and stuff like that. So that's if I want to get something really actually moving through the air. Okay, so guitars. I've got a steel string acoustic and a nylon acoustic. I've got 2 electrics here, having bought and sold quite a few over the years. The ones that I settled with are this James Trussart guitar, which these are made in a really interesting way. The parts are made and then they're kind of aged to kind of get this metallic rusty sort of sheen, and they're very, very beautiful, but also really well made. And so it's got that kind of, the neck's really nice. It's an easy guitar to play, really nicely set up, and it sounds great. It's like a kind of Strat on steroids. It's got like Strat type tones, but then it goes really kind of metallic as well. So that's a great one. And then this Fender Jag, I bought this from Terry Britton, who co-wrote What's Love Got to Do With It. And this was used in his studio, State of the Ark, and it was used by Snow Patrol on a couple of their albums and various other artists as well. So it's got a kind of cool history for the romantics among you, but it's got a great sound. The Jag has got bags of character. It's really, really fantastic. So to the synths, I've got a Moog Model D at the top here, which is almost exactly the same age as me. It still sounds amazing. It's got such character. Really, really great synth. I'm a fan of the Roland plug-outs. That's a System-8. And I think the ones that I've got in there at the moment are the JX3P, Juno 60, and the SH01. I've also got a Jupiter 8 plug out, which I can swap in and out of them. It can have 3 at any one time, and then it has its own kind of complex thing. It's really great. It's very close to the original sounds, and I've had those synths, and they were constantly going wrong, and they're very expensive to maintain. So this gives me something that's definitely usable all the time and has almost the same character as the originals, but is much easier to use. And then the very newest one at the bottom here is this, which I've only really just started to scratch the surface of, is this incredible, beautiful synth by Arturia called the PolyBrute 12. I bought this because I went to a friend of mine who knows everything there, has forgotten more than I've ever known about synths, and that's Gary Barlow. And I said to him, if you were going to buy a synth right now, what would be the best synth you could buy? And he said, well, funnily enough, there is this one by Arturia. And so I thought, I'm going to just, I went and looked at a bunch of YouTube videos, but I thought I'm going to go with it. I'm going to follow his advice, get it, and then see how I get on with it. And I can say that just from plugging it in and just going through the patch library and trying all the different ways of controlling stuff, it's got the most incredible keyboard. It's like a CS80, the way that you can control stuff from the keyboard. Right, let's go over here. Okay, this is a medieval instrument called the psaltery with a P, PS. And it's gloriously out of tune. And I like it that way because I use it for kind of special effects. And I've used this, in fact, I used this on the show, the BBC show called The Fades. And I used it like with loads and loads of reverb on, and I got all kinds of these great kind of sounds. And kind of, and you can imagine it's a horror show, kind of like a teen horror show. You can just make endless amounts of incredibly aggressive, awful sounds by miking it up really close. It really kind of makes your teeth set on edge. And you can kind of, I've made long drones out of it. There's all kinds of cool stuff in it. This is really great. And being out of tune is a vital part of its character. This is cool. This is a circuit bent Barbie keyboard. I got this from an enterprising chap who was selling them on eBay and doing some really mad and cool stuff with it. And this turned out to be really useful. I used it in the main theme, Mutant theme of Little Big Planet 3. It creates all kinds of crazy sounds in the background that you can hear kind of modulating and diving up and down in pitch and all kinds of weird stuff. I'm a huge fan of random and chance in music creation, and that's perfect for that. So one of the things I always advise people when I'm talking to them, students or kids at school, is if they're interested in music, they should really learn to read music. You can pick it up quite quickly, and once you get used to the process of reading music, you'll find that you just get better and better at it very, very quickly. And the beautiful thing about being able to read music is it unlocks a whole world. It's a kind of window into a certain style of music. So it doesn't really tell you anything about groove. It doesn't tell you anything about sound. There's obviously lots and lots of different musical worlds where notation is irrelevant. So I'm not talking about that, but I am talking about specifically Western orchestral music, harmony, that kind of stuff is the stuff that you will find in these. And also, you know, I've got loads of music of things that I've learned over the years, piano music. I played the organ, clarinet, what else? I did some singing exams, which I used to be a cathedral chorister. I'd love being able to come over and grab something and read it and get ideas and kind of inspiration. And then a lot of this stuff, you know, is also then it's like part of my life story. So it's part of who I am, and it has kind of huge sentimental value when I go back to it. So this is that kind of section. I've got a bunch of film scores here. Some of my favorite scores, Goldsmith's The Mummy is just fantastic, really great score. Of course, we've got Total Recall, Goldsmith, one of my favorite early scores, Goldsmith again. I've ignored the advice that John Powell tried to give me, which was stop looking at film scores, expletive deleted, and look at the real music, the original stuff, which is great advice. I do still want to compare that to the soundtrack. So when we talk about the real music, that's over this side. It's mainly this stuff here. So I've got a collection of mini scores and study scores that I do try and make sure that I'm spending some of my time actually looking at studying scores. That's there's one that I was looking at earlier, one of John's, Australia Dragon. But I'm also studying at the moment Petrushka, which I've started working through, and just again, it's really just reading through the score and listening to the orchestra and seeing how that works. And I'm about, how far am I into this? 22 pages into this book. This is a book that Jacob Collier said, oh yeah, that book that everyone has and nobody's read, because it's very, very complicated. And I have to read, I've hardly got into it at all. But I have to read each page several times before I think I've got my head around what Levy is saying. Why is this in the corner of the room? Because I'm clearly not a drummer. The answer is that, again, like with the guitar, with Pro Tools, I can do something while I'm writing that is a specific sound that I want to get, or a specific kind of part, without necessarily needing to be able to play the drums properly. And I can put things together bit by bit and get a kind of interesting sound, which I can then use. So it's kind of a creative toolkit, as opposed to being a proper drum kit. At the moment, I'm kind of enjoying the sound that they make. I've got them tuned like that. I've got a snare that I actually won in a competition, which is great. Which is quite high. It's got a nice snap, and then the rest of the stuff is like there's a Sobian hats, which have a kind of nice sizzle, and I use a small diaphragm condenser just over about halfway along to record that. And I can do, I can play a hi-hat part. The rest of the stuff is kind of like a basic stage ride, and then I've got a couple of smash cymbals I really like. I've actually sampled these and recorded them separately to use in tracks, but sometimes you just need to just play along to a track and hit the cymbals. It gives a programmed drum part loads of life. And then the rest of the stuff are just different types of crash. Kind of a really, China sound. This one, straightforward, different tone, and then really nice. It's got a very short decay because it's got so many holes cut in it. So the whole thing hopefully you've enjoyed having a little look around the room and the bits that you don't usually see. I'm intrigued to know if you think there's anything that I'm missing. It could be a bit of gear, or it could be something else, something that can give me inspiration. Let me know if there are bits that you use that are really important to your workflow and to your writing, to your inspiration. I'd love to hear what everybody else is doing. Thanks very much for watching. See you on the next one.